Hey everybody, welcome to another installment of the Den of Sin. It's the Den of Sin, CIN, with James and Devin. We're happy to be back here this week. And James, how you doing this week?
Hanging in there, man. Hanging in there.
Yeah,
it's been a rough week, but long week. But it's my weekend, so I'm gonna watch a bunch of Japanese tokusatsu movies, and I'll be all right.
That sounds perfect. I hear you have some thunderstorms out your way, so you can be watching those and wondering if something's coming up outside now.
Exactly, especially in Texas, because it may even be picked up on the headphone tonight. The thunder out here sounds like fucking cannonballs. Literally, I mean, it's literally woken me and my wife up in the middle of sleep because it was so loud. Like literally, like somebody put a shotgun outside of our window. So Texas storms are no joke. Well, first thing, I moved here in the middle of a storm, and the lightning it's unlike anything I've ever seen. So, but yeah, maybe you'll pick it up on the mic tonight.
With any luck, we'll get some lightning.
There you go.
Now, before I get to this week's topic, it's actually, I think, kind of appropriate to point out, not to be a downer, of course, but we've had a lot of people pass lately in the movie field, and I think it would be appropriate to mention a couple of the people that have passed that we admire. One is Olivia de Havilland, who... when Kirk Douglas passed a couple of months ago, I remember everyone saying, oh, he's the last movie star. And I would tell people, no, de Havilland's still out there. Douglas is not the last movie star. I don't know if de Havilland was the last movie star. I sure hope she's not. Star of Gone with the Wind and Adventures of Robin Hood and Pretty Incredible. And today we just lost Alan Parker, who's a pretty incredible director. Yep. If you don't know Alan Parker, you probably know some of his movies. Angel Heart, Pink Floyd's The Wall, The Commitments. Of course, there's Bugsy Malone, which James is a fan of.
I just watched it a couple of weeks ago.
And for the purposes of this podcast, he didn't get as much press, but I know James and I are both very disappointed to hear about the passing of John Saxon of Nightmare on Elm Street and Enter the Dragon. Yeah,
so he was, as a kid, I always thought as a kid that he was like a very like renowned actor because he just had that presence to me. One, I mean, growing up, we talked on the podcast, I was like still gigantic Nightmare on Elm Street fan, but also Enter the Dragon. Like, to me, just he carried this weight. Like, he's done a lot of different lower budget crime movies and what have you, but, those are, I think, probably things he's most known for. But those were movies that were really prevalent in my life growing up. So, but I always thought of him as this, sort of like big time actor. But, growing up, he definitely, I don't think he's ever gotten the credit he deserves. So,
no, he got kind of washed out in a sea full of George Hamiltons and George Pepards,
That's very true.
He was being bred as one of those handsome, young, strapping leading men, and certainly had the talent for it, and had a very successful career. So I'm trying not to put him down here by pointing out the things that he did that were great, but he did a lot of sort of underappreciated gems too. Like, I don't know if anybody ever saw David Cronenberg's Fast Company. He was in Fast Company. That was actually a really good early David Cronenberg that even if you were sitting there watching it, you probably wouldn't know it was David Cronenberg. It's about race car driving, but he's fantastic in it. And it's worth a watch if you're a Cronenberg fan. And
all should be if you're watching this podcast.
Yes, exactly. And that leads directly into this week's topic, which is in and of itself a celebration of a past legend, Carl Reiner, who just lost at the beginning of this last month.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think, just about a month ago, maybe a little bit more. But yeah, man, I mean, he's one of those guys that's had a very long career and thankfully has lived long enough that even his son is considered an old man at this point. But absolute legend. It was an absolute, it was a loss. Which, we'll talk about his work, but I think it also needs to be said, one of the very few people in Hollywood that you've never heard any bad stories about. People genuinely loved him. Just seemed like a good human being. On top of being, tonight we're talking about his filmography as a director, but obviously I think he's always been more in my mind a performer and a comedian, which is, I guess equally at this point, I think, and a writer, he's and a producer, but yeah, his talent was immense, and it's sad to see him go. But tonight we're going to celebrate his work, and I'm happy to do it.
Same here. You mentioned he was a writer. He wrote over 24 books.
Oh, I did not know that. No,
he was writing up until the day he died too. In fact, to touch on your point of what a great guy he was. the last photograph of Carl Reiner was put up on his own Twitter account posthumously by his daughter. And it was a photograph, everybody's probably seen it by now, of him and his daughter and Mel Brooks, all three laying on a bed wearing Black Lives Matter shirts. And I just love that's who he was. And I love that's who Mel Brooks is. Let's make sure we give some appreciation to Mel Brooks while we've still got him.
Absolutely. One of my favorite moments is with him is so Jerry Seinfeld has that show, Comedian Cars Getting Coffee. I find Jerry Seinfeld to be kind of a smug douche, kind of like. I respect him and as a comedian, you know, especially the heights he was able to achieve and stuff. But there's a smugness to, and a kind of a grossness to him, and he definitely has this arrogant vibe, especially if you watch the show.
I can see the arrogance for sure.
Yeah. It was cool to see him kind of getting taken down a peg or two by his heroes, by Carl Reiner, more so by Mel. But I got a great kick out of that. But it was just seeing Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks together and their relationship. And it was just like, dude, I just want to be their friends. And again, Carl Reiner just seemed like America's dad. Like, he just seemed like just the coolest guy. So, and again, I mean, the Black Lives Matter thing is, I mean, I can't say enough about that. So, but yeah, let's get into it. Cause once again, Devin, I've left all the preparation, all of the thorough investigation to you, and I'm just sort of chime in on the films of his I know and I've seen. I will say, bookending, his early stuff I haven't seen, and the last few movies not only have I not seen, I didn't even know they existed, honestly. There was a few movies in his filmography I was like, that's completely news to me. So it'll be fun to talk about. Now, is this one of the case scenarios where you've seen every one of his movies?
No, but I'm damn close. There's a couple that I'm missing towards the end. I've seen all the stuff at the start. Of course, I haven't seen all the TV he's done. We're talking about
which he's done a ton of TV.
Yeah. We're talking about feature theatrical here. Some of them I did go in and discover in the last few weeks leading up to this, so I hadn't seen all of them before he passed. I would have loved to have seen all of them one way or another, but there's a couple of them that are still not available in any way, shape, or form. And once I realized that, I realized I probably couldn't pull another Brian De Palma on this.
Yeah.
And it's not a tremendously long list either. It's a solid list. Like we're going to have no shortage of things to talk about.
No, absolutely not. And I will say, I wanted to do a few research. There is, I believe it's his second movie. It's a movie I've been wanting to see for a long time. As a huge Dick Van Dyke fan, it was his second movie, which I've always wanted to see, just because it seems like a role where Dick Van Dyke was able to really stretch his actual acting chops and stuff. And another great human being. Well, Jesus, what a mensch that guy, Dick Van Dyke. Still, I can't say enough about Dick Van Dyke. He's been one of my heroes since I was a little kid. But
one of the first actors who I knew by name.
Exactly. And again, yes, worst British accent ever, but charmingly so. So you can definitely start this. You're definitely probably more familiar with his work. I know you investigated some of his earliest film, or even his earliest film. So you can start this podcast with that.
Well, we can start with the one that you just mentioned, the Dick Van Dyke movie that he directed. Of course, everyone knows he created and featured in the Dick Van Dyke Show, which was largely autobiographical about Carl Reiner. Dick Van Dyke playing Rob Petrie, who is a version of Carl Reiner. So, of course, they were old friends. Now, he directed another movie before he got to this one that I'll just kind of casually mention. It's not out there for anyone to see right now. I ordered a bootleg of it and wasn't underwhelmed, but it just hasn't dated particularly well. Still a fun movie. It's called Interlaughing. If anybody gets a chance, if you ever find it, it's certainly cute. It's got some big names of the early 60s in it.
A very young Jose Ferrer, which is...
Yes. And he's actually the funniest part. He keeps on walking around with this bottle of booze in his breast pocket, but he's got a straw sticking out of it. And so he just keeps sneakily sticking his head down and sipping out of his straw so no one can see that he's constantly soused. That was one of the funniest parts. But the movie you were talking about really is kind of the first great Carl Reiner movie, in my opinion, and that's called The Comic, starring Dick Van Dyke, and it is also not easily available. It's more available than Interlaughing is. In fact, I was debating whether to mention how I got it. You can order it off of Amazon. It costs $20 or $17.99 or whatever, but it's a movie on demand. So you're actually ordering it through Amazon as the middleman for Columbia Pictures / Sony. And when you order it through Amazon, Sony then manufactures the disc for you based on the request, and then it takes much longer than the average 2-day shipping on Amazon Prime, because they're having to make the disc for you, and it's no frills, and you get it in a it's DVD in a standard case with no extra. It's a poster art on the front, no special features. I will say the picture was remarkably clean for what I expected.
That's good.
The bootleg of Enter Laughing looked like it had been run through a popcorn maker a few times.
I believe it. Yeah.
But the comic looked quite good, and it was also one that I wanted to see for a long time, because I remember it at the video store growing up, and the idea behind it was that Dick Van Dyke, when they were doing the Dick Van Dyke Show, he really admired Stan Laurel, comedian Stan Laurel of Laurel and Hardy, and he got to be friends with him. And he learned that Laurel and Hardy did not own their own faces. And he found that fascinating in and of itself, because all of the licensing, I mean, especially if you're talking about in the 60s and the 70s, there were cartoons of Laurel and Hardy, there were T-shirts of Laurel and Hardy, there were collectibles with Laurel and Hardy, and they weren't making a cent off of that. And these are the people who kind of invented screen comedy. Yeah. And Dick Van Dyke was talking about how he lamented that he was not of the appropriate age to have been a comedian at that time, but also talked about how those guys, and also including Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd and people like that, they never really got their due for who they really were. We just kind of saw them as these comedians. And so Carl Reiner wrote this script, the comic, for Dick Van Dyke, so that Dick Van Dyke could play a silent era comic. And it's a little indulgent at points. They show a lot of Dick Van Dyke's character doing his silent movies. Like, you'll probably see about 5 silent movies worth of movie just within the narrative of the comic. They're all shorts, but there's one scene where it actually gets impressive, where they do a split screen and show like 20 different screens that he's appearing on for different movies that he made. And you really get to see the physical comedy of Dick Van Dyke coming full force. But the real heart of the story is about the guy, and he is a genuine shitheel. And here's Dick Van Dyke playing him. And unfortunately... Which
is exactly why, I mean, first off, if you're going to cast an actor, especially at that time, who would be perfect in the silent film era, it would have been Dick Van Dyke. Mm-hmm. But also, Dick Van Dyke, the affable, funny goofball, playing an arrogant prick, it seems to me like something I need to see. So
he's an alcoholic, arrogant prick, and in real life, I don't know about the arrogant prick part. I kind of doubt it, but Dick Van Dyke did have the alcoholic part of him, so he was relating to that. And it's a pretty honest film. It's a little broad. It's not like you can watch it and feel like you're watching full real life, but it was apparently based largely on the story of Buster Keaton, with elements of Stan Laurel thrown in there, and the ending apparently was Harold Lloyd, or at least the character that plays his son was inspired by something that happened with Harold Lloyd, gotcha. Which Van Dyke has actually gone on to say is the one thing he does regret about the movie, is because the son is gay, and Dick Van Dyke plays the son as well. The son is not in the main character's life very much, because he screws up that marriage royally right towards the beginning. And when he pops up later in the movie, he sees his son, and his son looks just like him, but his son is very swishy and stereotypically gay. Yeah. And Dick Van Dyke has expressed since then that he wished that he could have played gay differently, but it is something that was true to Harold Lloyd. Harold Lloyd's son was gay, and from everything I know, I don't think Harold Lloyd shunned his son. His son built his own name in photography, I believe. But yeah, if you get a chance, it's worth the $17.99 and the few days wait through Amazon. If you get the comic, that's a movie that's really in need of a resurgence. It's different than anything else that's out right now. It's kind of the perfect storm of being underrated, good, pop culture filled. It's all the things that I love about doing podcasts like this, or having conversations like the ones I have with you, where you talk about something that it really needs to be brought back out into the light.
Yeah, and somebody needs to really get on it and release a very a great print of it, great copy of it.
Agreed. And Van Dyke and Reiner, they both agree that it flopped because it was advertised as being a slapstick comedy, and it is not. Don't be fooled by any of the marketing that you see for this movie. It is not a straightforward comedy. Which is
funny, because I think the original poster, it definitely gives the vibe that you're saying. So it's
it looks like a Jerry Lewis movie.
Yeah. Yes, it does actually. Yes, that's actually very true. But yeah, I mean, it's funny because, you know, when we talk about doing these podcasts, like a lot of the times, like, you know, either I've seen the film and I'm a big fan, or never seen it, or sometimes I don't even know about it. But it's funny because this has been a film for a long time that I've been meaning to see, just as like a Dick Van Dyke fan alone. But yeah, it's not available. It's not streaming anywhere.
There's no
I didn't even see the
YouTube
Amazon thing. I'll definitely have to check it out. Or you could let me borrow the copy. Oh no, that's right. We don't live in the same state anymore. I forget that sometimes. But yeah, I guess I could give Sony some money.
If there was a way I could send it to you and not lose my $20, I would do it. One of these days, I promise you will see that movie. I will share my copy, just not right now.
No worries. We're good. So
I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm using it because it ended up inspiring a script that I'm working on now. So it's become part of my my stack of research. Otherwise, I would send it tomorrow.
Oh, no worries. No. I support your art, and so yeah, you can keep it. I'll see it eventually.
Now the next one he did, or were you gonna?
No. I was gonna say no. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm just gonna try to speed through the 70s up to a point here, just because Where's Papa really is worth mentioning. A lot of people haven't seen it, but the people who have really love it. It was the first kind of legitimate. It was kind of the first cult film of Carl Reiner's career, being that it actually developed quite a cult following a year or two after it flopped, and the studio, which I believe was MGM, re-released it, the film Where's Papa, under the name Going Ape in the late 70s, early 80s. So if you ever saw a movie starring Ruth Gordon and George Segal called Going Ape, then you saw Where's Papa. What a horrible... Isn't Going Ape something with Tony Danza and Danny DeVito too?
I think so, yeah.
It Going Bananas or...
Going Bananas. But it has an ape in it. Yeah, dude. Yeah, it's a movie. It's a movie I do know about. Ruth Gordon is, you know, one of my... I'll watch anything with Ruth Gordon in it anyways, but I didn't know it was actually... I know of the movie, but I didn't know it was actually considered sort of a cult classic. That's interesting. There's something about George Segal that kind of bothers me. I don't know what it is.
I think a lot of people get that too. I get it. I don't have it, but I get it. He's in my favorite movie of all time, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. So I can never really talk shit about George Segal, but I can talk shit about a lot of George Segal movies. This is not one of them. This one's really insanely written. Like the words off the wall were written. That term was created for this movie. It's so bizarre. Ruth Gordon is his mother. She is keeping him out of relationships. He can't be with anybody else. It's like he can't even have friends. His mom is so crazy. There's even a deleted scene that has him ending up with his mom in the end. But it's almost avant-garde. It's almost avant-garde, which I think is what led to it having a cult following in the late 70s. People realized how weird and bizarre this movie is. But great stuff.
I needed to see that. I mean, yeah, it sounds cool. And, just even the words Carl Reiner avant-garde is like, oh, I think I need to see this.
Well, I mean, don't go in expecting Fellini, but
no, but yeah, I'll give it a, yeah. I mean, he, one of his movies, his later comedies, I wouldn't say is avant-garde, but definitely pushes, there's some oddness to it. Well, we'll get into, actually a few of his comedies, but we'll get into it. But yeah, I'll definitely check that out. Now, Devin, this is an important question. Did you grow up being an Oh God film franchise fan?
The first one, yes. I do remember my dad watching Oh God, You Devil, and already me at first or second grade saying, really, another one?
It's funny because that's the thing is for the longest time, I think I saw Oh God, You Devil first. I think it was playing on HBO or something. And then but growing up, I kept confusing the plot of Oh God for Oh God, You Devil. And I then get confused. But, I mean, I feel like George Burns is just, those movies, literally, he carries those movies just on his George Burns charm.
He does his magic.
Yes.
Literally magic.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he's God, so.
Yes. And John Denver's no slouch. John Denver showed he could really act in that.
Yes, I agree with you, yes.
Like, he's legitimately good. He's not, he's good for a musician good. He's a good actor.
John Denver, I feel, is one of the patron saints of wholesomeness. It's like him, Mr. Rogers, Bob Ross. I think there's like some like the patron saints of wholesomeness, and for me, John Denver will always be. And also, I grew up, I grew up not a fan of his music. I thought he was cheesy and corny, but now I celebrate his catalog for its beautiful, sentimental country pop folk vibes. And but he also looked exactly like my best friend growing up, Donovan Jeffcoat. They had the exact same weird haircut and glasses.
It's an unfortunate combo.
Yeah, but it was the 80s, so it was a lot of like stealth bomber and NASA t-shirts and members only jackets. He's now a doctor, so good for Donovan.
Well, he must have gotten rid of the haircut, because I swear to God, that haircut looked like Kermit the Frog did it himself.
Yes, exactly. I will say this though, because I know Donovan's not listening. His new haircut's not much better. But anyways, sorry, Donovan.
I remember
if you're listening to this.
The week that John Denver died, which was horrible in the late 90s, I think 97, 98-ish, in a plane crash. I remember standing in line at a grocery store, and there were two guys behind me buying some beer, and they looked up at like the headline on People magazine or whatever, and he said, "Oh man, John Denver died, man." And his buddy said, "Ah man, that guy could only hit one note." And the first guy says, "Yeah, but man, could he hit that fucking note?"
I love it.
I thought that was pretty
funny.
On the spot.
You mentioned that's pretty good. You mentioned Kermit, and it's funny that you said that, because John Denver and Kermit, I can't think of John Denver for some reason without thinking of Kermit.
Oh, that's why I said it. He is probably outside of obviously anybody actually involved with the Muppets, like Henson or Oz. He's probably the human being most associated with the Muppets.
I agree with that. Yeah, he is sort of like a human Muppet in a little bit of ways, and more of a Sesame Street kind of Muppet. But this is a weird tangent that I didn't expect.
Well, to pull it back into Oh God, have you ever heard of the other casting possibilities for Oh God, who Carl Reiner almost went with?
I have not.
Now, just to be clear, I'm very happy with George Burns and John Denver, but I will always be curious. The original casting was supposed to be Mel Brooks as God and Woody Allen in the John Denver role.
Whoa, that would have been crazy.
I mean, talk about crossing the streams.
Wow, that would have been insane. I kind of wish there was an alternate universe we could go to and see that movie.
Yeah, same here. I don't know if that movie would have been better. It's hard to imagine anyone better in those roles, because those two actors really embodied it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's unfortunate that I admire Woody Allen more as a writer than as a performer, but it's unfortunate on the Mel Brooks end that we never did actually get to see Carl and Mel work together as a director and performer. We did see them act a little bit together, but never anything major. So their names are always kind of kept together, and they never did get that opportunity. And I think that would have been cool that they would have had that moment together.
Absolutely. Yeah, that would have been amazing.
And I think we probably can get a fairly good idea of how Mel Brooks would have played God by listening to the 2,000-Year-Old Man recordings that he did with Carl Reiner, which are also brilliant. But I think Burns may have been the better choice.
Yeah. And I think because George Burns just had this, first off, like, as much as, George Burns has this identity and this, like, almost like twinkle in his eye kind of that is really mischievous and a little bit like there's a sardonic quality to him that, worked perfectly in that role. And you could definitely see, I could buy him as God. I'd be like, yeah, this is God. I believe this. So.
Well, he had the right level of mischief to play God, I think. I think
exactly.
To me, it almost seems like George Burns' version of a practical joke would have been saying, "Hey, Sonny, you got something on your shirt." Whereas Mel Brooks' idea of a practical joke might have been pushing you down a manhole.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I love it.
So I think he brought a soft kindness to the part.
Exactly.
Now, the next one I'm excited to talk to you about, because this is one I had not seen until this week. And when we decided we were going to do Carl Reiner as a topic, I texted you to make sure that you saw this one too. And you had already seen it, because of course you have, because you were the biggest wrestling fan I know. And the movie I'm speaking of is The One and Only. Do you want to set up The One and Only for us, James?
Sure, yeah. So it stars Henry Winkler and Kim Darby. It's sort of based off of the life of real life wrestler, and honestly one of the most influential people in entertainment history and sports entertainment history, if you have it, Gorgeous George, who honestly single-handedly invented modern pro wrestling. Gorgeous George was one of the biggest celebrities of his era. He basically created this over-the-top theatrical before Gorgeous George, wrestlers were usually, cauliflowered eared, busted nose, Midwestern, collegiate, wrestlers who got into the pro wrestling business because it was really the only way to make money. But it was usually just a couple of busted face, tough guys. But, Gorgeous George realized like there was this whole avenue that you can explore of theatricality and really get people invested, and especially as a quote unquote heel or as a bad guy wrestler, he created this very like pompous, like flamboyant, a little bit feminine, but like at the time he bleached and curled his hair, which in the mid 50s was not normally done. So
they were going to toss your man card for doing that back then.
Exactly, but he played. He was a legitimate wrestler, and he created all these sort of underhanded sort of cheating gimmicks. But audiences love to hate him. I know him personally. My father used to tell a story that my grandmother hated it. She said she hated him, but she honestly loved him, and every time he was on TV, she had to watch. But so Henry Winkler sort of plays this very we'll nicely say deluded actor who thinks he's like the God's gift to acting, but and wants to be famous. He thinks he deserves to be famous, but he meets this young lady, and they get married. But he's obsessed with becoming a star, and basically he's through a series of coincidences, he's basically he enters the wrestling business, even though he's not a typical wrestler like all these other guys tower over him. But he basically decides to create this character called the Lover, which is again very much based off of Gorgeous George, which is very flamboyant and with these extravagant robes and stuff. The
blonde hair.
Yeah, and like
you want to see the Fonz. I'm not just saying Henry Winkler, but I mean Fonz era Henry Winkler with that golden hair.
Yeah, exactly. Is it a good movie? It's a little kind of pedestrian. I'm the biggest Henry Winkler fan as a kid. Like I still this day, I anything with Henry Winkler in, I'll watch it. Especially, I think anytime he does like an interview, he's again just another person that just seems like the nicest guy. Especially for being, at one point the biggest. At one point, it was like him and Vinnie Barbarino were the biggest celebrities in the '70s, and legitimately a good actor. Lords of Flatbush and stuff, like he's a good actor. But
Night Shift.
This was sort of what's up?
Night Shift,
which is a movie I love. But yeah, it didn't do well. It definitely, I think it was going to be like make Henry Winkler this big, film star, and it just didn't work out that way. But the movie's really interesting. Like I said, for me as a wrestling fan, I mean, first off, it's got not only do I love wrestling, but I am the world's biggest Roddy Piper, rest in peace, Roddy, biggest Roddy Piper fan. He's in it. Chavo Guerrero, a couple of legitimate actual wrestlers play the wrestlers and stuff. So growing up, that had an appeal. But I haven't seen it in years. So I mean, even the last time I saw it, like especially there's like the second act is kind of drags a little bit. Henry Winkler for the first time doesn't play a super likable character.
He's a little obnoxious, but he's charming too.
What's up? Yeah, but you also see that like he's got this big ego, but at the same time he's just he's suffering from low self-esteem, so he makes up you see the pain of the character, you see the humanity of the character, but
he's aware of what he's going through. Yeah,
exactly. But like I said, it's an interesting movie. I do think it has its charm, and again, like I think watching Henry Winkler play somebody who isn't the Fonz is always interesting. And like I said, this character was the antithesis of the Fonz. So, it's a movie I wish, I think it could have been a great movie and I don't know if it was, I'm not putting the blame on Carl Reiner or anything. Like, I don't know if it was the script but definitely it could have been a little stronger. But, I saw it as a kid. I saw it, like I said, it was on TV a lot. I would always seem to catch it. And I would always end up watching it from start to finish or wherever I caught. I think Kim Darby probably might be the best legitimate thing about the movie.
She is good. She's usually the best thing of whatever she does. For those who don't know, she was the young girl in the original True Grit who hires John Wayne as Rooster Cogburn for some good old West vengeance.
But yeah, it's definitely a movie that, like, I don't know if I would recommend to everybody. You know, I don't know if everybody, it would be everybody's thing. But there's moments of greatness. And again, I thought all like the period stuff was really well done. I actually thought all the stuff in the wrestling, there's a look to 50s wrestling that I think Carl Reiner did a really good job of replicating. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if your particular take on the film, but like I said, I grew up enjoying it on my own realm, but it's hard to distance the movie from my own eyes to see it from somebody who maybe not is into like wrestling history or even the even taking it as a movie just about a guy who goes and like take out even the Gorgeous George inspiration, but just, you know, maybe you're not into wrestling based dramedies. So,
well, I thought it was very good. I mean, of course, now I'm seeing it here in my early 40s, having never seen it before. And my feeling is, I think you're right. I think if I had seen it when I was younger, there are elements I wouldn't have understood. And it was a little bit more pedestrian. It was a little bit more like what was out at the time.
Yeah.
But what was out at the time has become so rare in and of itself that as a time capsule,
That's a good point.
I would watch
actually
that
a really
movie
good point.
anytime. Over again and over again and over again, just because I found it so cute and charming, and I found Winkler to be so charming, and it's really about his ambition and trying to be the one and only, and trying to prove to his wife that he's the one and only, and their struggles, which take him to some really selfish places, and she's just giving and giving and giving until she has a kid and she can't give anymore. I thought it was a really sweet picture. And there needs to be more of that. And so as a timepiece, I give it the recommend. If we were sitting here in 1978 or whenever it was, 1978, I might have not been as kind to it. But sitting here in 2020, I miss this kind of movie, and I wish there was more.
Yeah, and I will say this too, and like I said, I've it's one of those movies in fact, I was actually weirdly before, I think even right before we talked about doing this podcast, I was actually trying to compile every movie that had featured pro wrestling as a major plot point or as, you know, a major facet of the script. And, when I got this, I was like, I need to rewatch this. There's more movies than you'd think that feature pro wrestling as part of the script.
Yeah.
But yeah, my last thing I'll say about it is I don't think it's one of his more popular movies, but I definitely think it should be more well-known than it is. And Henry Winkler can do no wrong in my book. So even just to watch Henry Winkler play this really over-the-top kind of, wannabe star but who finds unexpected success in somewhere he didn't think he would succeed. Like, anyways, it's a weird time capsule and a weird little movie, but I do enjoy it.
Same here. And the next one, we are starting to now get into movies that people might have actually heard of. And we're going into now what I would kind of consider to be the Steve Martin period of Carl Reiner's career, in which Steve Martin and Carl Reiner kind of became the Scorsese and De Niro of comedy, starting with 1978's The Jerk. Now,
which I'm going to be bold here, and I'm going to go on record as saying it's the greatest comedy ever made.
Wow. So I would put it in a top 5. The greatest, though. Tell me more.
I don't know, man. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if...
Is it picking out the Thermos song?
Dude, it's literally... It's everything. It's every now and then somebody hates these cans will come into my brain, and I'll laugh every time. It's so original. It's so unique. It's easily the best thing that Steve Martin's ever done, and Steve Martin's a goddamn genius. So it encapsulates everything about when Steve Martin was an actual comedian. It's exactly what made him funny. It was this weird sensibility, this unique way he saw the world, this sort of just absurdity, but also there's a sweetness there, and a real humanity. And like, I will say without a doubt, while there's a movie on this list that I might equal my pure love of, I will definitely say it's for me, it's Carl Reiner's best movie.
I mean, it's interested in knowing the other one, because I'm with you on this so far.
Again, my other favorite is. We'll get into it, but
okay.
But yeah, it's one of the greatest. It's perfect from start to finish. And one thing I wanted to talk about is there's a lot of this script, a lot of the story that a movie like this could have aged really poorly.
Oh, yeah. they're walking a fine line with this movie, but man,
but
their
the thing
brilliance
is,
pulls it off.
Yeah,
and the kindness of the script, the kindness of the character.
And the thing is, because the thing, and this is what's so great about this movie, is the joke is always on Steve Martin. It's always on Steve Martin's character. He's not like, there are characters like scummy characters, there's over the top characters, there's whatever, but the joke is always on him. So there's no mean spirit in this, and like, okay, for people who for somehow are listening to this who've never seen The Jerk, he's raised by this very like poor Southern black family, and that could go real bad. There's even some dialogue in it that definitely, like you said, gets to the precipice, walks the line, but it definitely has aged far better than a lot of movies from its period who still tried to do the same thing. But it's, much like Blazing Saddles, while there's some like, oh shit, kind of like comedy about it, the where the joke is pointed is always the right way. It's always in the comedy's coming from the right direction. But yeah, the movie's great. Steve Martin in it is genius. I mean, the cast, everybody, even like the people, the sort of people who play his family, everybody he runs into, the cast is fucking perfect.
Jackie Mason, Bernadette Peters,
who's Bernadette Peters will be one of my lifelong crushes. It features my favorite ukulele song. Is that a thing?
It is in this movie. It wasn't a ukulele song originally. It was
I know.
It was by Patience and Prudence. You're talking about Tonight You Belong to Me.
Yeah, which is one of my this performance specifically is it melts my heart. But yeah, yes. Devin, I've pontificated enough about this movie. What are your feelings?
Well, you've kind of pontificated on my behalf as well. You kind of said it all. It's really a damn near perfect movie. Just that character is so simple and innocent and
so innocent.
And I swear, like, he takes everything so literal. Like what you were saying, when these cans, somebody's taking shots at him with a sniper's rifle across the street and hitting these oil cans, and he would never stop to think that somebody was shooting at him. No, these cans are defective. What's going on with these cans? And then when he sees that somebody's shooting, he still thinks he hates these cans.
Oh God, so ridiculous and so good.
And the writing is so sharp, and like you said,
good.
The secondary cast, Carl Reiner actually plays a very short, brief moment himself in it. And who else was it? Carl Gottlieb, who co-wrote this script, but also co-wrote Jaws. He stars in the movie as Iron Balls McGinty. See if you can.
I guess we have to talk about Iron Balls McGinty. Oh God! One of the greatest dumb things in film history. Dong.
Yep, Oscar winner Carl Gottlieb as Iron Balls McGinty.
It's let's go at M. Everett Walsh in my favorite role of it. It's being the most M. Everett Walsh that he's ever been. That dude. Oh God! I think it's a cross toss between. Is his name in the movie like? Isn't he just billed as like crazy person or
probably
something like that?
It wouldn't surprise me.
But yeah, it's definitely dude. I mean, if you've never seen it, you have to see it. It's a must. It's literally a must. Like,
yeah.
And I'm a giant Steve Martin fan. He actually has his autobiography is actually interesting. It really kind of opens up to who he is as a person and stuff. But and the fact that he walked away from he was the biggest comedian at one point in the world, and at the height of his fame, he just walked away and has never gone back to it as far as doing stand-up comedy. And it's really interesting. But again, at the time, he had this really offbeat. It's weirdly innocent and sweet and very he was silly. I think that's the best word. He was perfectly silly at a time when you had guys who were really starting to develop very pointed political comedy and very cutting edge comedy. And here comes this fucking dude who was just silly, irreverent and silly, but in a way that nobody had ever done before with such a clear vision. And and this movie is exactly what his comedy was. So easily the best of the Carl Reiner Steve Martin films. Not that the others are bad, but I think this is definitely without doubt the best of the four. But
well, before we get on to the other ones, I do want to mention there was a deleted scene in The Jerk
Mhm.
that apparently co-starred Bill Murray.
Really?
Which would have been amazing. I'm sure it would have been. Well, it was cut from the movie, so who knows? Maybe it was shit.
Yeah, exactly.
But apparently, when Bill Murray was doing Weekend Update at the time on Saturday Night Live, and he used to do the movie reviews for Weekend Update, which they don't do anymore so much these days. I think the last one I saw doing movie reviews was Tracy Morgan. But Bill Murray was giving his review of The Jerk, and he said that it was an okay film, but it was missing something or someone. And so that kind of unwraps the secret behind that comment on Weekend Update.
There you go.
And oddly enough, just a kind of a fun fact, Stanley Kubrick was a huge Jerk fan and apparently would quote it all the time.
I love it. Of course, that's incredible.
Of all people. Like, I'm just imagining Stanley Kubrick running around singing, "I'm picking out a thermos for you."
Exactly. I'm going to take this phone and anyways, but yeah, so
I can imagine Kubrick. I can imagine Kubrick walking through the set of The Shining saying, "I don't need this. I just need this." And
that's amazing. I don't need this typewriter. So I'm going to say something kind of controversial for this next statement, which is I'm not a big Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid fan, and it's been a few years since I've seen it, but I definitely appreciate what they were trying to do with it. But I think the last time I tried to watch it, I was probably in my late 20s, and I just couldn't get into it. I might be a fool. It might be a genius, but as a kid, I didn't like it. And then again, trying to watch it in my late 20s, I just couldn't jive with it. But you tell me, Devin, what are your feelings on Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid?
You're not wrong. I'm not going to be bold enough to call it a bad movie, but it's pretty damn close. It's probably the closest anything on this section of the list comes. It feels like so many other movies I call from the 70s and the 80s. I don't dare put this really on Reiner, but kind of what I call cocaine movies that seem like they were probably brilliant if someone was doing cocaine and said, you know what about Steve Martin, but we cut him with shots from old Bogart movies and Burt Lancaster. And first off, I think you have to be not just a casual fan, but a rabid fan of film noir to get most of the references in that movie. And I feel that was the case back then. And I feel like it's quadruple the case now.
Absolutely.
And it's just one trick played out for an hour and a half. And is it funny? Yes, it's funny, but kind of passively so. Like, you will laugh if you watch the movie from start to finish. I guarantee you'll laugh. I don't know if you're going to feel like you were necessarily rewarded for it.
I will say this. I think film noir is one of those genres that is so specific and works in its own sort of the mechanics and all of the tropes of film noir work when, especially at the time. So many people have tried to do either modern film noirs or satirical film noirs. And I don't think most people are successful because so much of it is lost in the translation of it. And I mean, it's the film noir aesthetic is definitely, there's so much there you can play with, but for some reason, most attempts don't work for me. And I don't think work in general, like being even objective about it. I think, critically and, a lot of those films just don't end up being as successful. And I think in this, it was this, like I said, I appreciate what they were trying to do. Very ambitious kind of artistic choice, but I don't think it was successful. But
no, and
again,
oddly enough, Reiner's favorite of his own work, which is
very weird,
disappointing to hear. I would much rather have heard that about the the Jerk or one of the other movies we're about to mention. But that was Reiner's favorite. I think that speaks more to how big a fan, though, Reiner was of classic movies.
Yeah,
and you can see that throughout his entire run. So perhaps since we don't have a whole lot kind to say about Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, this might be a good spot to just point out something that I feel a kinship with Carl Reiner over is that passion for old movies, because Enter Laughing has references to old movies. Obviously, this film has 19 different old movies that it flashes back and forth to. There are other ones on this list. Burt Rigby, You're a Fool is his love letter to old musicals. Even his outrageous sort of attempt at a Mel Brooks broad comedy, Fatal Instinct, is also a tribute to film noir and has elements of Double Indemnity to its plot. So he clearly loves the old movies, and I think that's what made this number one in his book, was that he enjoyed maybe working with Bogart in a way that he otherwise would not have ever
would never go.
Bogart.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think as a fan of himself, in a way, not to paint a conceited picture, I see that as a reasonable choice for what he got to do and how weird he got to be with it. But for the rest of us in the audience, it just doesn't quite pay off.
Yeah, I agree 1,000%.
Now, the next one, he was kind of back up on top of his game, and so was Steve Martin, and that was The Man with Two Brains, which, before we go too far, I'm just going to blow your mind here for a second. You know who Steve Martin originally took the script of Man with Two Brains to?
Who?
David Cronenberg.
That's two David Cronenberg references tonight on a Carl Reiner episode, but that's but weirdly I can kind of see it.
Yeah, Shivers era Cronenberg, you know. Although I think that was a few years ahead of this. This would be more like, I guess, Videodrome era Cronenberg. But something that's that kind of weird and kind of gross sci-fi. I don't. Cronenberg's a champion of body horror. I don't consider Man with Two Brains to be body horror, even though it's pretty horrible to be a bodiless brain.
Yep.
But
I very true.
As soon as I read that little fun fact, I've been looking forward to telling you about that.
That's incredible. But I think obviously, you know, the movie is has this weird love letter to old 50s and 60s drive-in science fiction, you know, movies. So I can see Cronenberg. I can see Steve Martin thinking like, oh, like, you know, I could see maybe this being sort of in Cronenberg's wheelhouse. Does it anywhere that you've seen, does it say why Cronenberg might have passed on it? He just didn't think.
My guess is that he just didn't have Steve Martin on his creative radar at the time.
Yeah, I don't think he was ready to do broad comedy at that point. But around
the time of Novocaine, Martin and Cronenberg might have been perfect bed buddies.
Yeah, in fact, at some point we should do a whole episode about Steve Martin, because again, I think as a writer,
I'd love to.
He's an interesting writer too. His books and his plays and stuff. Yeah, it's a movie I grew up loving. You know, I also, as a kid, I had a little bit of a crush on Kathleen Turner, so that also helps. There's something about her voice, though. I just still like perfect voice. But yeah, it's a weird movie. It's a very weird movie, but it was perfectly. First off, Steve Martin, perfect for it. I mean, you know, did he write it too?
You know, I'd have to double check that, but it seems to have Martin's brand all over it. If he didn't get credit for writing it, I'm sure he did extensive rewrites.
Yeah, he wrote it with George Gipe.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a weird movie. It's a guy who falls in love with a talking brain. So
yes, voiced by Sissy Spacek, by the way. She was uncredited in the film. Yes.
Dude, Devin, I love this podcast because I learned all these crazy things I didn't know.
Sissy Spacek plays the brain, whose name, by the way, of course, is Anne Amalmahay. And Steve Martin plays Dr. Har. If you can't get your head around those names, this movie's not for you.
No, exactly. So good. But yeah, it's a silly movie. I mean, ultimately, it's a silly movie with a silly premise, but that, you know, it has a good heart
and two good brains.
Yes. Don't get the Abby normal brain. But then bump. Another. I know we've talked about works already. So works. It ties. Anyways. But yeah, it's very similar in tone to another movie that we're probably going to talk about. But do you have any specific feelings on The Man with Two Brains?
I grew up on it. Not quite as much as I grew up with The Jerk, but yeah. I always considered them kind of the perfect double feature.
Oh yeah, I could see that. I actually think it's a better double feature with another movie we're about to talk about personally. But
okay, I think I know which one that may be. But yeah, just to wrap up, Man with Two Brains. It's one of those ones. I remember the cover in the video store. Now I had seen the movie on TV, probably edited, because it's pretty R-rated. I'm sure I saw it on. I guess I could have seen it on HBO, but there was just as much chance of me seeing it on.
It was on HBO all the time. That's where I saw it. It was literally on HBO all the time.
But I had never put it together with the box art, so I was actually significantly older before I remember seeing that box art and saying, "Oh my God, that's Steve Martin." I'd seen that picture of him screaming with the two brains so many times and never, like, I just thought it was a legitimate horror movie. No idea that was Steve Martin in The Man with Two Brains. But yeah, great memories. Not quite as good as The Jerk, but pretty close. And a cameo by a very young Jeffrey Combs, if anybody is a Reanimator fan.
That's right.
So let's move on to the next one, which I think might be the one that you're talking about as being a good double feature with. Which
yes.
You go ahead and take the reins then.
So the follow-up to this was his last Steve Martin movie, Steve Martin starring vehicle, which was All of Me, featuring Steve Martin and the unbelievably talented Lily Tomlin. Basically, it's a very stupid story of this rich lady's dying and her soul gets transferred into like she's trying to transfer her essence into like somebody younger and healthier, and but somehow it ends up in Steve Martin's body, and now they're like two people sharing this brain, and she's got, you know, the joke is like, you know, they're fighting in the same body. Like it's the most broad at this point. It's the broadest comedy. It's like almost like a family movie.
It is. It's a lot cleaner than the other movies he did with Martin.
Yes, absolutely. Much cleaner than The Man with Two Brains and The Jerk. But it's very sweet. I mean, ultimately, you know, it's got a really cute ending. It's got two of the greatest comedians of all time, but two of the greatest comedians of their era. And Lily Tomlin, you know, not obviously, you know, Steve Martin was probably, I would say, the bigger movie star, I guess, but you know, Lily Tomlin fucking plays second to nobody, and she's fucking amazing in this movie. And
she was riding a wave at that point. That was right around The Incredible Shrinking Woman, and of course 9 to 5.
Yeah, 9 to 5, exactly. I completely forgot about The Incredible, which is a great movie, another movie I grew up with. But yeah, she's fucking great in it. Steve Martin's great. It's Steve Martin. This is when Steve Martin stops being like sort of this weird esoteric 70s like kind of cult figure, or, you know, like being a more like subversive guy. Now this is the Steve Martin of like Parenthood and
no longer the wild and crazy guy, although very wildly physical.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, this is still in the same vein as like a Jerk, as far as like it's a very physical thing. He's doing a lot of like physical acting, and it's very, like I said, it's a very broad comedy. But it's
Martin, I'm going to go on record here saying Steve Martin's right leg was robbed of an Oscar that year. The things he was doing with his right leg in that movie.
Perfect. I love it. That's exact. And the thing is, if you've seen the movie, you completely get that joke or that reference. Yeah. You know, and I so by in the movie, I'm like, well, that's Lily Tomlin's right leg. But yeah, so it's a good movie. It's definitely not a movie like I think and modern audiences know about. It
was a huge hit at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Huge.
I remember my mom coming home from the theater, seeing it with, I think my next door neighbor. And it was one of the earliest memories I have of my mom coming back from the theater and saying, "You're going to like this movie. You have to see this movie when it comes out on HBO."
I mean, the thing is, like, yeah, we watched it a ton in my house. In fact, 9 to 5 was one of my mom's favorite movies. And then, like I said, as a family, we watched The Incredible Shrink all the time. So, yeah, again, I think all because of HBO. So, but
by the way, anyone that is interested, All of Me is actually available on HBO Max right now.
There you go. I may watch it tonight.
Definitely do. It holds up. It's still as funny as you remember it.
So yeah. So I mean, I think that we've said enough about this. I'm also a giant fan. I mean, his next two film.
Are you ready for some summer?
I am. I'm looking forward to two long summers. I'm sure there was a much better joke with there, but I missed it. But yeah, the next movie is a movie I grew up with, starring two of my heroes. But I'll let you can go ahead and take this one.
Okay, well, it's another one I grew up with. I'm sure my dad's still laughing at some of the stuff that happens to this poor guy in the movie. Summer Rental with John Candy, which was part of a wave of summer or of vacation movies that came after National Lampoon's Vacation. They weren't all road movies like Vacation, though. This one was just a summer vacation movie, and not even the only summer vacation movie starring John Candy, because of course there was The Great Outdoors a couple years later. But I actually think Summer Rental's the better movie, partly because it's not as broad as Great Outdoors was, and it really did feel much more like a slice of life with an average suburban family going on this vacation where nothing can go right.
Yeah. And the thing is, John Candy has obviously, like John Candy, I grew up loving John Candy. As a bigger kid too, like John Candy was one of them. But John Candy was always like, this was the start of him actually being less like a character actor or less of a supporting actor and really becoming like a sort of the star of a movie. And in fact, he plays like, he has a very, he has a pretty wife and stuff, but he's a boob. He's like the typical boob. Like he makes a lot of, but God damn it, he's so goddamn funny and so like likable and like
natural.
Absolutely.
He's so likable. If he doesn't feel like your dad, then he feels like your neighbor's dad. He's charming. He means well on every count and just can't do it right. I mean, half the movie is them on vacation at the wrong house.
Yep. Oh God.
And I'll never forget. They find out they've been vacationing at the wrong house because the owners come in late at night and wake up him and his family. And on the way out, while they're unpacking their stuff and thanking God that the cops weren't called on them, I remember the little girl saying, "I wet the bed, Daddy," and John Candy saying, "No, honey, you wet their bed." And
exactly.
I think I rewound that 10 times when I was about 7 or 8.
No, honey, you wet their bed. I know. Oh God. I mean, yeah. I mean, the movie is like, again, it was I grew up with that and Summer Rental and The Great Outdoors were basically like synonymous. Like watched them all like over and over again. But I think you nailed it. I think of the two, it's like it's pure escapism. It's like just put it on and laugh, and it's got I need to mention Rip Torn and Scully. Like
yes.
It's
I have something to say about Rip Torn, though. A fun fact for you about Rip Torn.
Let's hear about a fun fact about Rip Torn.
Okay, Rip Torn was actually not born by a human mother. He was discovered inside the Disneyland Pirates of the Caribbean and just kind of walked off of the boat from that straight into this movie.
Exactly. One thing though is, and it's still to this day, I get specific plot points confused between this and One Crazy Summer, because they're both
they were right around. They might have been the same. No, I think One Crazy Summer was
similar in years.
It was
but
a year or two off.
Yeah, but I mean, similar story plot points or whatever.
May have been the same beach for all I know.
It could have been, but it's such a fun movie. It's
and there's a regatta in both. That's a big part of it.
There's a regatta. Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. That's my, they got to do a yacht race or a race between two rich dickheads. Although the rich dickhead in this is John Larroquette, right?
No, John Larroquette is the guy who comes in and becomes friends with John Candy's wife, but is actually
that's right.
Not
that's right.
a problem. The Richard Crenna is the
that's right.
in this movie.
That's right. You're right.
Hot off of Rambo 2.
But yeah, it's a fun movie, and weirdly, the first of two movies that start with the word summer. So there's a few movies in your life that are real pivotal. Like there's something about the movie, and they're not necessarily always the best movies, not even sometimes good movies, but sometimes there's a movie in your life that just for whatever reason hits you and becomes very essential to who you are as a person. And for me, one of those movies in my life, one of the very formative movies, was Carl Reiner's Summer School.
Yes. Part of what made me who I am today too.
Yeah, and I knew it. I knew that, and that's the thing. Is that's why there's so many things about it. That first off, I'm a sucker for that time frame. That and so for people that haven't seen it, Mark Hamill basically plays this. Mark Harmon plays this sort of like PE teacher who just doesn't give a shit about his job. He doesn't care. He coasts through life. He's too cool for school. Everything he says is literally everything he says is sarcasm. But basically, he gets forced to do this summer school with all these delinquents, and it's basically like a classroom full of failures and misfits. And the cast is great. I feel like I keep saying this, but I had growing up, weirdly enough, I had a huge crush on Kirstie Alley, and she was very, very cute in this movie. And I had a big crush on Courtney Thorne-Smith, and they were both in this movie. But it's just, it's pure, what is it, 87?
87, I believe.
87, yeah. It's that, yeah, 87. It's pure, like, late 80s cheese and it's got heart. Like all these kids aren't, like he doesn't want to try, but he gets all these kids to sort of like care, and he comes invested in them, and but he's always like hitting on girls. And he's trying to sleep with Kirstie Alley. There's a lot of great dialogue.
He doesn't try to sleep with Courtney Thorne-Smith, though, which I will applaud the movie for. I watched this with my daughter this week. I hadn't seen it in a long time, and I couldn't remember. I'm like, oh my God, does he make a move on the 16-year-old? He doesn't. Does he? He doesn't. Does he? No, he doesn't. It's a clean movie. She makes a move on him.
Yeah, exactly. But he's a scumbag, but he's not a total scumbag.
He's a rascal.
He's a rascal. Exactly. You're very much in like the Steve Guttenberg, like police, like all of that era of films of like the charming rascal, like the good looking, free spirited rascal who just, doesn't take anything too seriously, but has a heart of gold. But it's great. And, also in this, I don't know the actress's name. She plays the French foreign student in this. Wow, was she also a crush on her in this movie? I feel like I'm just sounding like some weird lech. But it features the two most important film characters in my life, Chainsaw and Dave. Two horror movie Texas Chainsaw Massacre loving rascals who have all the best lines. They have all the best moments. Gary Riley, who plays Dave, he was great in it, but Dean Cameron, who to me just somehow is just synonymous with the 80s. In fact, I don't know if you're a fan of Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but they actually cast Dean Cameron to basically make fun of himself in the roles he played in the 80s. Like, what if those characters grew up? And he's perfect in it. And it's kind of heartbreaking, but the movie's so fun. And like I said, it's as a horror lover, and at the time I used to talk about this movie, I'd be like, if as a diehard fan of horror movies, I'd bring it up to other horror fans of my same generation, and we'd all love this movie and discovered, not just because of Chainsaw and Dave, because it's a fun movie. It's I think Mark Hamill was perfect in this. I actually at the time thought Mark Harmon was going to be kind of a bigger star. You don't even know to do TV and stuff, but I to me he was a good looking, he was funny, and I honestly thought he was going to be a Tom Hanks level talent. But
yeah, I thought he was going to be a big deal because he followed this up with the Presidio, which is a pretty big hit too.
But it's a great movie. And
Chainsaw, his bedroom with every inch of the wall covered. That became my ambition as a kid, was to have a bedroom like that. And I did it. I made it. And I know I've been in your bedroom. I made it too in high school.
Same. It was a huge. In fact, I literally to this day I keep saying, like, I've said it multiple years. I'm like, this summer I'm going to have like suspenders and a long trench coat and like like their style. I love their fashion sense, Chainsaw and Dave. But
and they probably fed a whole new generation. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a must see.
Absolutely. I've said that before. I've literally said, like, I think as a kid, it was the first time I probably even ever heard the words Texas Chainsaw Massacre was watching.
Probably here too.
But yeah, it's a great movie. Devin, you can espouse yourself if you want.
Well, you've said it all so perfectly. It just is such a perfect time capsule. It was important to me at the time. I'm happy to say that the movie still stands up. I'm happy to say that unlike so many other fantastic 80s movies, it does not become lecherous or trip on its own 2 feet. In modern times, it's still a straightforward, really fun, wacky comedy. And as far as Carl Reiner is concerned, I thought this was really cute. The most notorious scene in the movie is probably the substitute scene, where the Mark Harmon's Mr. Shoop character is fired and they bring in a substitute, and the kids rebel by just creating carnage in the classroom. And I mean literal carnage. It's special effects, blood and guts. You had a kid with her fingers in the pencil sharpener, and you had another kid who had a ruler shoved in her mouth, and one was hanging from the wall, and one had a circular saw blade sticking out of his head. It was such a great scene. Just scare the hell out of this substitute teacher, who of course runs away as one would. And they're able to use this as leverage to get their favorite teacher back. I don't think that would work as real leverage in real life, but God damn it works really well in this movie. And I found out that Carl Reiner made sure to direct that sequence on October 31st, so the cast could wear that out. The cast was legitimately like 16-year-old kids. He set it for Halloween so that they could use those special effects as their costumes that night.
That's so rad. I didn't know that. That's so rad. See, again, what a guy. That's amazing. And again, too, like, also real quick, like, the cast is like Kelly Jo Minter, a very young Shawnee Smith, who would go on to, notoriety later, like with the Saw franchise and stuff. But the whole cast, like everybody in it, all of the kids are great. It's just like you said, it's aged really well. It's still charming. I think it's still funny, and I literally watch it all the time. I probably watched it the last time I probably watched it maybe 3 or 4 months ago. It's definitely, I feel like it's always streaming somewhere too, which is, helps. But
right now it's on Showtime. But it was a perennial of mine for a long time, and now that I've seen it again, I think it's going to become a perennial again. Just takes me back to summer days, waking up late and making myself a huge bowl of Lucky Charms. And
exactly. And then again, too, who doesn't love summer? Like, it says, especially California, as Californians, the movie just, it just feels like my childhood. So
yeah, they're all wearing the clothes. I didn't know anybody that wore a trench coat in June myself, but the rest of the clothes were the clothes that my friends wore. And...
In fact, I think Courtney Thorne-Smith wears like an OP shirt, and I was like, oh man, that's my childhood.
Because she's the surfer babe.
Exactly. So now, I will say from here, I have not seen one of the final 4 or 5 of the movies he followed up with these. I haven't seen one. In fact, most of these I've never even heard of. In fact, I thought Fatal Instinct was I didn't think that was a real movie. I thought my brain had created that movie. But yeah, if you want to talk about the rest of the movies, I've literally not seen one. I don't even know really anything about sibling rivalry or whatever.
Well, sibling rivalry, I haven't seen since the early 90s, which I believe is when it was made. I don't remember it being particularly great. I remember it was one of the first things I saw with Sam Elliott in it, but that's I didn't rewatch it for this. Truth be told, I didn't rewatch it because it's not available anywhere. It's out of print, and I wasn't going to spend out of print DVD money on that movie. I didn't feel like watching That Old Feeling, which was his final film. You can rent it. It's a romantic comedy about a former couple who are rekindling things for their child's wedding. They're forced to get back together. It's a kind of a tired old story. Bette Midler doesn't excite me as the lead for that, although I like her as an actress.
Me too.
But it just seems like her. It doesn't seem anything spectacular. The only reason I kind of was curious to see it was that Dennis Farina is the love interest.
Yeah,
and Dennis Farina is he's kind of a walking cigarette. And so I didn't know how I would take him as a romantic lead, which I think is part of the point of the movie. He's supposed to be the gruff ex-husband. If I had had a little more time, I would have gotten around to it, but I didn't. I did, however, see Burt Rigby, You're a Fool for the first time, and I wish I had more to report on it. It's a perfectly good, charming little movie, but ultimately I watched it about a week and a half ago, and I've already forgotten major segments of it. I think it was really ambitious for Carl Reiner. It was his musical. He really tried to hit all forms of comedy, his slapstick comedy, romantic comedy, all the way down the line, avant-garde comedy like we discussed. And this was his musical comedy, and it was his tribute to Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire. And I don't know why he went with the subject matter he did. It's about a coal miner from some rural part of England who's convinced that he's going to be a big star, but much like the one and only. Mm-hmm. And so he runs off and tries to become a star in Hollywood as a singer. But the problem is his voice doesn't sound like Tiny Tim's, but his vocal inflections are like Tiny Tim's. I don't know if probably most people don't listen to Tiny Tim's music, and I'm one of the oddballs that has. He has one album that I think is an American essential, but
it's funny. I was just watching a YouTube video of Tiny Tim like 6 hours ago.
Such a bizarre character.
Yes.
It's one of my dreams to make the life story of Tiny Tim into a movie someday. Just such a weirdo. And I would have loved this movie a lot more if it had been more along those lines. It couldn't decide if it wanted to be a cult movie or if it wanted to be mainstream. And instead it ended up being neither. And it's well-intentioned. It's cute. Characters that you start off kind of annoyed with kind of win you over at a certain point. But really, to say that the characters that annoy you will win you over eventually is not much of a selling point.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Amen. Just to say I saw it and that it's probably deserving of a little bit more of being known than it is, but you're not missing a whole lot. Now, Fatal Instinct, I did see
it doesn't
that.
sound like it.
I saw Fatal Instinct when it was new. Because I was the right age. I was a teenager when this came out, and it was a more of a Mel Brooks type, super broad parody kind of comedy.
Yeah.
And so this was him doing his buddy Mel Brooks. And I started off kind of annoyed. These movies can go 50-50 each way. Movies that are that broad, they're trying to make you laugh 200 times in an hour and a half, and they're going to make you laugh at least 20 times if they're trying to get you to laugh 200. So there's usually something worthwhile to all of these. Just sometimes they miss. And I think this one missed at the time, but I think it's actually worthy of reexamination. If anyone wants to check it out, I believe it's on Amazon Prime now. It was better than I thought. Once I got past my own prejudice of, oh God, here's another mid-90s, making fun of Fatal Attraction sort of thing.
Exactly. Dracula Dead and Loving It kind of.
Yes. Movies that just never get past the hump of quite being funny. This actually made me giggle more than most of those movies did. I don't think it's a lost masterpiece. I do think the comic's a lost masterpiece, to loop this back to the beginning here. The Dick Van Dyke film, the comic.
Yep.
This not so much, but this is, since it's on Amazon Prime and it's much easier to get than the comic is, just for killing a Sunday afternoon, especially if your mind might be altered a little bit, it was pretty funny.
Good to know. Yeah, I mean, definitely, until you gave the review, I had zero. And I'm actually going to probably blow your mind. I've actually never seen Basic Instinct. Never seen it. Nor do I really honestly care to. It's never been a movie. Fatal Attraction I've seen. Yeah, and that's the thing is, I'm not even saying it's a bad movie, but there's just something about it. Something about its notoriety. I don't know. I also used to hate Sharon Stone, and then I saw Casino and realized she's definitely capable of absolute brilliance. But
Casino changed a lot of minds. Yeah.
Yeah, but it just doesn't. It's never appealed to me. Fatal Attraction I have seen, and it's good, especially at the time, good cast. I mean, Glenn Close is amazing in it. And, Michael Douglas is always Michael Douglas. But yeah, I've never seen Basic Instinct, and I probably never will. Not out of any sort of pride or anything, but not, I don't know. I guess never say never. Maybe one day I'll feel like putting it at it was that era of the special 90s with the 90s sort of adult thriller kind of thing. And it's just,
well, for some reason it caught the cultural zeitgeist that it caught.
Really?
I don't know exactly why. For those who weren't of age in the early 90s, the scene that made Basic Instinct famous had nothing to do with its storyline or the violence or the ice pick or any of the gruesome stuff. It was just that Sharon Stone crosses her legs during a police investigation and you can see up her skirt and she's got no panty. Why this blew everybody's mind in 1992 when we'd already lived past all the nudity of the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing against Sharon Stone. I think Sharon Stone's gorgeous, but I don't think any part of her body is cultural zeitgeist level.
I agree 100%. And that's, I think, honestly, that I think that's a big part of it because I thought that whole thing was stupid. I'm a grown man with the internet. I've seen that kind of thing. But
you didn't even need the internet back then. You had, Russ Meyer movies were already a thing, or
exactly.
Even legitimate. Diane Keaton had already done Looking for Mr. Goodbar.
Now I will say that
was just a fact of life.
Yeah, but I will say that in the sense of the story, it's somebody who her manipulation of men and her, I get it, it's that's an interesting plot point, she's so unimpressed by these police that she's using her sexuality as a tool. That's interesting, but again, just I don't know, it's never been enough inspiration for me to watch a movie, but maybe one day. But
well, the reason I mention it here in our lovely conversation about Carl Reiner and suddenly going off into Sharon Stone's full frontal nudity is because I saw the poster for Fatal Instinct when I was doing my research on it. My God, it's a close-up shot of legs crossed, a la Basic Instinct, and then across it says "Opening soon."
Oh my God, that is some Mel Brooks territory. Oh, good Lord.
So that ties it back into this class act that was Carl Reiner.
Yeah. Well, Devin, we did this because obviously we wanted to sort of pay our respects to the man after his passing. But, again, it's fascinating going through somebody's filmography, especially when you haven't seen all of the films and you're sort of, from my point of view, in these cases, where you're sort of, kind of discovering them secondhand and whatever. It's pretty fascinating. But also, like I said, if I can celebrate movies like The Jerk, or even The Man with Two Brains, like any opportunity is great. And maybe somebody out there who's listening to this for some insane reason hasn't seen Summer School or The Jerk, and maybe now, and even again, maybe even the comic or
oh God, oh God, I wish if there is a God, I hope it's George Burns.
Absolutely. Well, with that, I say good night, Gracie, and I'll let you close it out.
Actually, I'm going to end with a story because I can't believe I didn't mention this at the start. I met Carl Reiner. I have a personal Carl Reiner story. This was 1997. Yes, 1997. So that would have made me 18 years old. And I went out to Santa Monica with our mutual friend Casey to a Screenwriters Guild event called Words into Pictures. They've had a few since then. And because it's an industry sort of guild event, there were elements of it like a convention, like a modern day convention. But because it was industry, it wasn't like you would go and watch a panel and then they would all go off into the green room. It was a situation where you would go and see these incredible panelists and then they'd hang out with you and then you'd have a cocktail party at the end of it. I was very impressed with myself in 1997.
Yeah.
Being in the room with a lot of these people. Casey and I checked out a panel on comedy writing that was, get this, it was Carl Reiner, Robert Townsend, Tracy Ullman, Carrie Fisher, Gary Marshall, and James L. Brooks.
Holy crap. That is bananas, dude. Wow.
Teaching how to write comedy. So that was amazing in and of itself. And then when it was over, I started to naturally gravitate towards, I think that I got to have little moments with all of them, actually. I got to have little moments. But the one that stands out was Carl Reiner. I started to edge closer and closer to his corner of the room after the panel was done. And I heard at least 10 or 15 people approach him and say, "Excuse me, Mr. Reiner, are you looking for a personal assistant? Are you on the market for a personal assistant?" Because, of course, this is a Writers Guild event. They aren't looking for autographs. They're looking for jobs.
Exactly.
And when I finally found my moment where I was looking up and looking straight into the face of Carl Reiner, I looked at him and I said, "Mr. Reiner, do you know if Mel Brooks is looking for a personal assistant?" And he just shook his head and laughed and said, "Smart ass," and walked away. And I will always be proud of the fact that Carl Reiner called me a smart ass.
Smart ass. That is amazing. That's the best story to end this podcast. Oh, Devin, you're my hero. That's incredible. I don't even know what to say to that. That's, oh my God, that's incredible. I'm so jealous of that story.
It was a good day.
And you are a smart ass, so he's not wrong.
Well, thank you. That's the second smart person to call me a smart ass.
There you go.
That I know of.
Exactly.
I'm sure my wife says it a lot and I just don't hear it. But she's not wrong,
Selective
ladies
hearing.
and gentlemen. She's not wrong. All right.
Absolutely.
Well, okay, then let's go ahead and close out this episode of The Den of Sin. Make sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and anywhere that you enjoy your podcast, whether that be Spotify or, let's see here, we've got Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. Come on, you pick it. Anywhere you like to listen to it, we are there now. So just look for us, Den of Sin, CIN. And do you have any closing comments, James?
I blew my good joke with Good Night, Gracie. So no, I don't. Outside of, this is always fun. So I look forward to the next.
As do I. And hopefully we'll have that up and running a lot sooner than we have been doing. And we intended to do this once a week. I don't know if we're ever going to quite hit that spot, but I'm sure we'll get to at least more than once every 2 or 3 weeks.
Yes, we'll aim for at least bi-weekly, but hopefully we can we underestimate ourselves and we can get into a weekly schedule. But soon, I promise.
All right. Thanks for listening, ladies and gentlemen. You stay safe out there.